He attempted to return her sword. It ignited in light, and her warriors fled. Elian had always thought of himself as an ordinary young man. A historian by trade, he spent most of his days buried in ancient books and forgotten records. His job was not glamorous, nor did it come with glory. He lived a quiet life, studying the past and deciphering the secrets of long-dead civilizations. But that was before he stumbled upon something that would change the course of his life forever. It was a warm morning when Elian found himself in the ruins of Veridale, a city once known for its beauty and power, now reduced to nothing more than crumbling stone and forgotten memories. He had heard whispers about a hidden temple deep within the city's remains, one that was said to contain artifacts from the time of the Golden Empire. The Golden Empire, an ancient civilization that once ruled over vast territories, had disappeared from history long ago, its secrets buried beneath the sands of time. With nothing but a map and a deep sense of curiosity guiding him, Elian ventured into the heart of the ruins. The wind whispered through the broken walls, and the sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground. As he walked deeper into the forgotten city, the air seemed to thicken, as though the very stones around him held the weight of history. It was here in the very center of the ruins that Elian found it, the entrance to the hidden temple. The entrance was guarded by two massive stone statues, their faces weathered by centuries of neglect. But there was something in the way the statues stood, something that suggested they were more than mere stone. As Elian approached, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, though there was no one in sight. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, pushing open the heavy stone door. Inside, the temple was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from cracks in the ceiling where the sun's rays filtered through. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, depicting scenes of warriors in battle, gods descending from the sky, and what appeared to be a great ruler holding a sword that glowed with an ethereal light. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of ancient wood and stone filled his nostrils. As Elian moved further into the temple, his eyes were drawn to a pedestal at the far end of the room. Upon it lay a sword, its hilt encrusted with jewels and its blade gleaming with an otherworldly light. It was unlike any weapon Elian had ever seen. The sword seemed to hum with power, as though it were alive, waiting for someone to claim it. He couldn't resist. He approached the pedestal, his heart pounding in his chest. When his fingers touched the hilt, a surge of energy shot through him, making his whole body tremble. The sword ignited in a brilliant flash of golden light, filling the room with a warmth that was both comforting and terrifying. Elian stumbled back, dropping to his knees, overwhelmed by the power that flowed through him. For a moment he felt as if the weight of the entire world rested on his shoulders. He gripped the sword tightly, trying to steady himself. The hum of the blade grew louder, and the light began to pulse, as if it were calling out to something. Elian's mind raced. What was this sword, and why had it chosen him? His thoughts were interrupted by a loud crash. Elian spun around, heart racing, only to find that the door to the temple had slammed shut behind him. He was trapped. Panic surged through him, but before he could react, a voice echoed through the temple. "You have found it." The voice was soft, but it carried with it an authority that made Elian freeze in place. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room for the source of the voice. He saw no one. "The sword has chosen you," the voice continued, "but you must understand the responsibility that comes with it." Elian's mind swirled with confusion. The voice sounded ancient, as though it had been speaking from a time long past. He looked down at the sword in his hand, unsure of what to do next. The voice spoke again, this time more urgently. "You are the last of the line. The sword is a symbol of your legacy, and with it, you must restore what was lost. The empire you are bound to is not gone, not yet. But it is fragile. You must be ready to defend it." Elian's breath caught in his throat. The words made no sense. How could he be the heir to an empire that had been lost to history, and how could he possibly restore something so ancient? He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a leader. He was just a historian. But as he stood there, holding the glowing sword, a sense of purpose began to grow within him. The sword pulsed in his hand, as if it were calling to him, urging him to take action. Elian closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had no choice but to follow the path that lay before him. Whatever this sword was, whatever power it held, it was now his responsibility. Suddenly, the door to the temple creaked open. Elian's eyes snapped open, and he saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was an old man, his face weathered with age but his eyes sharp and full of wisdom. "I have been waiting for you," the old man said, his voice calm but firm. "Who are you?" Elian asked, still holding the sword tightly. "I am Vale," the old man replied. "And I have been guarding this place for many years, waiting for the rightful heir to return. You are the one who will restore the Golden Empire, Elian, but first you must understand what you are up against." The old man stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the sword. "You are not just holding a weapon, you are holding a key, and the key to the Empire is buried deep within you." Elian felt a chill run down his spine. What did Vale mean, and why had this sword chosen him? He had never asked for this. He had never dreamed of being anything more than a scholar, but now his fate had changed forever. Vale looked at him with a knowing expression. "The path ahead will not be easy, the sword will test you, but you must be ready. The Empire is waiting for its heir." With those words, the old man turned and began to walk toward the door. Elian hesitated for a moment, then followed, still gripping the sword tightly in his hands. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. Elian stood at the doorway of the temple, sword in hand, watching as the old man, Vale, disappeared into the shadows. His words echoed in Elian's mind, repeating like a drumbeat. The sword is a key. The Empire is waiting for its heir. What did it all mean? The weight of the sword seemed to grow heavier in his grip, as if it sensed his confusion. Elian looked down at it again, the golden light still glowing faintly from the blade. The temple around him seemed to hum with an ancient energy, as though it were alive, watching, waiting. He had never asked for this. He had never wanted to be a hero, let alone the heir to an empire lost to time. Elian was just a scholar, a man who loved the past but had no desire to relive it. Yet here he stood, holding the very weapon that had once belonged to a legendary ruler. The sword of Arisella, the last queen of the Golden Empire, a civilization that had vanished centuries ago. With a deep sigh, Elian turned and began to follow Vale through the temple's dark halls. The old man moved quickly, his steps echoing off the stone walls. It was clear that Vale had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and Elian couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency in the air. The temple was vast, its corridors winding and narrow. The deeper they went, the colder it became, and the light from Elian's sword seemed to flicker as if struggling to hold onto its power. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of centuries of forgotten history. Elian had read about the Golden Empire, but nothing could have prepared him for the atmosphere that filled this place. The very walls seemed to whisper ancient secrets, their voices lost to time, but still present, hanging in the air. Finally, they reached a large chamber, its walls adorned with intricate carvings. The floor was covered in dust, and the air smelled faintly of incense. In the center of the room stood an altar, its surface smooth and dark, surrounded by golden pillars that reached toward the ceiling like silent guardians. Vale turned to Elian, his face solemn. "This is where it all began, the heart of the Golden Empire. And now it is your duty to bring it back." Elian looked around, his heart racing. "How? I don't even understand what this sword means. What am I supposed to do with it?" Vale walked to the altar and placed a hand on the stone. The sword was never just a weapon. It was a symbol of power, of unity. It was meant to unite the different clans of the Empire, to bring them together under one banner. But when Arisella fell, so did the Empire. The clans scattered and the sword was lost. Elian stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "But why me? I'm just a historian. I'm not a warrior. I don't even know how to use a sword." Vale smiled softly, but there was a certain sadness in his eyes. "You are the descendant of Arisella. It is in your blood, Elian. The sword has chosen you because you carry her legacy within you. But you must accept your role, whether you are ready or not." Elian took a step back, his mind racing. A descendant of Arisella? The thought was almost impossible to believe. He had never known anything about his family, his past. He had grown up in the small town of Greythorn, far from the ruins of the Golden Empire. His parents had died when he was young, and he had spent his life in search of history, not searching for his own. He looked down at the sword again, its blade shimmering in the dim light. Could it be true? Could he really be the heir to an ancient empire? The sword seemed to pulse in his hand, as if answering his unspoken question. Elian gripped it tightly, trying to steady his thoughts. "But I don't even know where to begin. How do I restore an empire that's been gone for so long?" Vale's expression grew serious. The first step is to find the Celestials. They were Aricella's warriors, her protectors. They are the key to unlocking the Empire's power. Without them, the sword will not fulfill its purpose. But be warned, Elian, the Celestials are not easy to find. They have been scattered across the world, hiding from the very empire they once served. Elian nodded, though his heart was heavy with doubt. Finding the Celestials seemed like an impossible task. How could he, a man with no training in combat, find warriors who had been scattered for centuries? Vale seemed to sense his hesitation. You will not be alone. There are others who believe in the Empire's return. There are those who have been waiting for the rightful heir to return, and they will help you. But you must prove yourself worthy. The sword will guide you, but only if you are ready to accept its power. Elian took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He had always believed in history, in the power of the past to shape the future. But now, it seemed that the past had come alive, and Elian was caught in the middle of something much larger than he had ever imagined. I understand, he said finally, his voice steady but uncertain. I will do whatever it takes to restore the Empire. Vale nodded, his eyes filled with approval. Then it is time to leave this place. You will begin your journey at the gates of Alurin, where the first of the Celestials is said to reside. But remember, Elian, the road will not be easy. There will be dangers, and you will face trials that will test your very soul. The sword is powerful, but it is only as strong as the one who wields it. With those final words, Vale turned and walked toward the exit. Elian followed, his thoughts swirling with uncertainty and determination. The future of the Empire rested on his shoulders, and though he didn't know if he was ready for such a task, he had no choice but to move forward. The sword would guide him, he hoped, and the warriors would help him. But in the end, the fate of the Golden Empire was in his hands. As they emerged from the temple, Elian took one last look at the ruins of Veridale. The past was alive in this place, but so was the future. His future. And with the sword in his hand, Elian knew that the journey ahead would be the greatest challenge of his life. But it was a challenge he was ready to face, for the sword was not just a weapon. It was his destiny. Elian stood at the gates of Alurin, the city where the first of the Celestials was said to be hiding. The city before him was a far cry from the ancient ruins of Veridale. Alurin was alive, bustling with people from all walks of life. It was a city of contrasts, old stone walls and modern buildings, markets filled with goods from across the world, and streets lined with towering trees that had stood for centuries. Yet despite its vibrant appearance, Elian could sense a tension in the air. Something was not quite right. As he walked through the bustling market streets, Elian couldn't help but notice the wary glances people shot his way. They seemed to recognize the sword he carried, and that filled him with unease. The golden light of the blade seemed to hum softly, its energy unmistakable to anyone who had once known the power of the Golden Empire. Elian was aware of the eyes on him, but he paid them no mind. His task was clear: find the Celestial, learn what he needed to do next, and restore the Empire. But it felt like an impossible challenge. He had spent hours searching for the Celestial, speaking to local merchants and asking anyone who would listen. But no one seemed willing to help. Each time he mentioned the word Celestial, people either turned away or muttered under their breath. The few who spoke seemed afraid, their faces clouded with suspicion. As the sun began to set, Elian grew frustrated. He had traveled far, followed the path Vale had set for him, and yet he felt no closer to his goal. His thoughts turned back to the temple, where Vale had spoken of the Celestials with such certainty. They are the key, Vale had said. They are the protectors of the Empire's legacy. But no one in Alurin seemed to want anything to do with them. In a moment of desperation, Elian decided to visit the local tavern. He had hoped to find someone who might know something more. The tavern was dimly lit, filled with the smell of roasted meat and the sound of laughter. It was the kind of place where men and women from all walks of life gathered to share stories, both true and exaggerated. Elian stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the fire as he made his way to the bar. The bartender, a middle-aged man with a scar running down his cheek, looked up as Elian approached. "What can I get you?" he asked gruffly, wiping his hands on a rag. Elian hesitated for a moment. "I'm looking for someone," he said, his voice steady but unsure. "A warrior, someone who might know of the Celestials." The bartender's expression changed in an instant. His eyes narrowed and he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're not from here, are you?" Elian shook his head. "I'm not, But I've been told I need to find them. I need to find the last of the Celestials. They're the key to restoring the Empire. The bartender let out a low, nervous laugh. The Celestials, he glanced around the tavern before continuing in a whisper. You don't know what you're asking. People don't talk about them here, not anymore. Elian's curiosity piqued. Why, what happened? The bartender glanced over his shoulder again as if checking for eavesdroppers. Then in a hushed tone he spoke. Years ago they were heroes. The greatest warriors the world had ever seen. They served the last queen, Arisella, but after the empire fell they disappeared. Some say they were hunted down, others say they fled, but one thing is for sure, nobody wants to talk about them. They're ghosts now. If you're not careful, they'll turn on you. Elian felt a chill run down his spine. But they're still alive, right? The bartender nodded slowly. Somewhere, but good luck finding them. They don't want to be found. Before Elian could respond, the bartender stepped back, his attention shifting to a group of men who had entered the tavern. Elian was left with more questions than answers. He had hoped that Alurin would be the place where he would find the answers he sought, but now it seemed like he had come to a dead end. Feeling the weight of the sword once more, Elian stepped outside. The city had grown quieter as the night deepened, and the streets were bathed in the soft light of lanterns. He looked up at the stars, wondering where he would go next. Just as Elian turned to leave the square, he heard a voice calling out to him. You're looking for the Celestials, aren't you? Startled, Elian spun around to find a figure standing in the shadows. A tall woman dressed in dark leather, her face obscured by a hood. She stepped forward, her presence both commanding and mysterious. Elian instinctively gripped the sword tighter, unsure if she was a friend or a foe. Who are you? Elian asked, his voice wary. The woman smirked. I could ask you the same thing, she said, her tone playful yet serious. But I think we both know the answer. She glanced down at the sword in Elian's hand. I can help you find the Celestials, but first you'll need to prove you're worthy. Elian's mind raced. How does she know about the sword? Before he could respond, the woman continued. The Celestials are no longer the same as they once were. They've scattered, hidden themselves away, but I know where one of them is. She paused, as if waiting for Elian to speak. Elian finally found his voice. How do you know about the Celestials? Who are you? The woman's smirk faded, replaced by a look of determination. My name is Lyra, she said, her voice soft but firm. And I was once one of them. I was a Celestial trained to fight to protect, but the Empire fell and so did we. Now I walk in the shadows, a remnant of a time long past. But I can help you find the others. I can help you restore the Empire. Elian's heart raced. A former Celestial, he had heard the stories, but he hadn't expected to meet one in the flesh. Why would you help me? He asked, suspicion still lingering in his mind. Lyra's eyes darkened. Because the Empire is worth saving. The sword you carry is not just a weapon, Elian. It is a key. And if you truly want to restore the Empire, you will need all the help you can get. Elian stared at her, torn between trust and doubt. Was she truly who she claimed to be? Could he trust a former Celestial to guide him? But the sword in his hand pulsed again, its energy reaching out to him, urging him to act. All right, Elian said, his voice steady. I'll follow you, but you need to tell me everything. Lyra nodded. I will, but first we need to leave Alurin. It's not safe here anymore. There are forces at work that don't want the Celestials to return. As they walked into the darkness, Elian couldn't shake the feeling that his journey had just begun. The road ahead would be filled with dangers and unknowns, but with Lyra by his side, he might just have a chance to uncover the truth about the Celestials, and about himself. Elian's mind was racing as he followed Lyra through the quiet streets of Alurin. The night air was cool, but the weight of his thoughts made him feel warmer than usual. He had never imagined his journey would lead him to meet a former Celestial, much less someone who claimed to have once fought alongside Arisella herself. But now, with Lyra by his side, it felt like his path was becoming clearer, even though doubts still clouded his mind. They moved quickly through the darkened streets, avoiding the main roads. Lyra seemed to know exactly where she was going, her steps confident and purposeful. Elian did his best to keep up, but he couldn't help but glance around, always aware of the shadows that seemed to follow them. The city, though quiet now, still felt full of hidden dangers. Lyra led him out of Alurin into the wilderness that lay beyond. The path grew narrower and the forest grew thicker. The trees were tall and ancient, their branches reaching high above, blocking out most of the starlight. It was a place Elian had never visited before, but he could sense that it was important. This was where the Celestials had once roamed, hidden from the world, living in the shadows of the empire they had sworn to protect. After several hours of walking, they arrived at a small clearing. The moonlight shone through the gaps in the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, covered in moss and vines. It looked ancient, like it had been here for centuries, untouched by time. "This is where we'll meet the first of the Celestials," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying an air of finality. She stepped closer to the altar and placed her hand on the stone, as though she were greeting an old friend. "His name is Kale. He was one of the greatest warriors of the Golden Empire, but after the fall, he retreated here. He doesn't trust easily, but if you are the heir, he will help you." Elian felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. Meeting the first Celestial was not something he had anticipated. How could he possibly prove to someone like Kale that he was worthy of restoring the Empire? He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't even sure if he believed in the legend of the Golden Empire. But the sword in his hand pulsed with energy, urging him forward. He could feel the weight of the legacy that had been placed on his shoulders. "We need to be patient," Lyra said, her voice breaking into his thoughts. "Kale will come when he's ready. We can't rush him. The Celestials have their own way of doing things." Elian nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in his chest. He had spent most of his life studying history, not living it. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. But he had no choice now. The sword had chosen him, and with it his destiny was sealed. Hours passed in silence. Elian and Lyra sat near the altar, watching the stars above. The sounds of the forest filled the air, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of distant creatures, the soft whisper of the wind. Elian tried to focus on the peacefulness of the moment, but his mind kept drifting back to the task at hand. The Celestials, the Empire, the sword, everything seemed so far out of his control. Finally, as the night grew colder, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and broad-shouldered, his movements silent as a shadow. The man's face was hidden beneath a hood, but Elian could see the glint of his eyes in the moonlight. His presence was commanding, and Elian instinctively stood, his hand tightening around the sword. "Lyra," the man said, his voice deep and steady. "I see you've brought a guest." Lyra stood as well, her expression a mixture of respect and caution. "This is Elian," she said, gesturing toward him. "He is the one we've been waiting for, the heir to the Golden Empire." The man, Kale, didn't speak for a moment. Instead, he studied Elian with a piercing gaze. Elian could feel the weight of his scrutiny, as if Kale were looking straight into his soul. Finally, Kale spoke again. "I've heard the rumors," he said, his tone neutral. "But rumors are nothing more than whispers. I will not make any judgments until I see for myself." Elian's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, but he wasn't sure how to prove himself. He wasn't a warrior, and he wasn't sure what Kale expected from him. The sword, however, seemed to pulse with a quiet intensity, as if it were urging him to take action. Kale stepped closer to Elian, his gaze never leaving him. "The sword you carry," he said. "It is a weapon, yes, but it is also a symbol of the power you are supposed to inherit, but symbols are not enough. Power is not enough. You must prove that you have the strength to wield it." Elian swallowed hard. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice shaky. "I'm not a warrior. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with this sword. I'm just a historian." Kale's expression softened slightly, though his gaze remained intense. "That is your first lesson," he said quietly. "You are not just a historian. You are the heir. You may not be a warrior now, but you can learn. The sword will teach you if you are willing to learn. But you must be prepared to face the challenges ahead. The road you are on is not an easy one." Elian nodded slowly, the weight of Kale's words settling over him. He had always been a student of history, but now he was living it. The sword, the Empire, the Celestials, it was all real, and it was his responsibility to restore what had been lost. Kale stepped back, his eyes narrowing. "You have a long way to go before you can truly claim the title of heir, but if you are willing to fight for it, I will train you. But be warned, this will not be easy. You will face dangers you cannot imagine. You will face trials that will test you in ways you cannot yet understand. Are you ready for that?" Elian took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he knew he had no choice. The future of the Golden Empire rested on his shoulders. And if he wanted to restore it, he had to prove himself worthy. "I'm ready," Elian said, his voice firm. Kale gave a small nod. Then we begin. The next several days passed in a blur of training. Kale taught Elian how to wield the sword, not just as a weapon, but as an extension of himself. The Celestial's training was grueling, pushing Elian to his physical and mental limits. At times, Elian felt as though he couldn't continue, but each time he faltered, the sword seemed to push him forward, urging him to keep going. Lyra, though mostly quiet during the training, offered Elian advice when needed. She had been a Celestial once, and her knowledge of the ancient ways proved invaluable. She taught him how to read the old texts, how to understand the ways of the warriors who had fought to protect the Empire. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Elian grew stronger. He began to understand the sword's power not just as a weapon, but as a tool for uniting people, for restoring balance to a broken world. He wasn't just learning to fight, he was learning to lead. But even as he grew stronger, Elian knew that his journey was far from over. Kale's training was only the beginning. There were still many Celestials to find, many challenges to face. The Empire was broken, and the path to restoring it was fraught with danger. But with each lesson, each swing of the sword, Elian felt more certain of his place in this world. He was no longer just a historian. He was the heir, and the time to restore the Golden Empire had come. The days grew longer as Elian's training continued, and with each passing moment, he felt the weight of the sword in his hand becoming less unfamiliar. His body had grown stronger, his movements more fluid. Kale's methods were harsh, but Elian had come to respect them. Each bruise, each scar had taught him something. With every cut and every fall, he was learning not just how to fight, but how to lead. Though Elian had made progress in his training, the doubts that had haunted him in the beginning still lingered. Was he truly ready to face the challenges ahead? The power of the sword, which had once seemed so overwhelming, now felt like an anchor. It was his connection to a past he barely understood, and every time he wielded it, it felt more like a burden than a gift. But Kale's words echoed in his mind. Power is not enough. You must prove that you have the strength to wield it. Elian wasn't sure if he had that strength, but he was determined to find out. The morning after another grueling training session, Kale called Elian to meet him in the clearing. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, the trees surrounding them whispering with the wind. It had rained earlier in the day, leaving the ground soft beneath their feet. Elian, Kale's voice broke through his thoughts, it's time for you to face the next trial. Elian looked up at the towering figure of Kale, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Elian wondered if the trials would ever end. How much longer would he need to prove himself? Was there an end to this journey, or was he meant to train forever, always preparing for the impossible? What kind of trial? Elian asked, trying to steady his voice. Kale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the horizon, where the sun had just begun to rise, casting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The first test was physical, Kale said, to see if you were strong enough to carry the sword. The second test was mental, to see if you could handle the responsibility of the power you now wield. But the third test is the hardest. It is the test of the soul. Elian frowned, his confusion growing. What does that mean? How can a trial test my soul? Kale turned to face him, his eyes filled with the wisdom of countless years. It means that this trial will test your heart. You must make a choice, Elian, a choice that will shape the future of the Empire. You will face your greatest fear, your deepest regret, and you must decide how to move forward. Elian's heart raced. He had faced physical challenges before, and he had learned to think strategically, but this was different. A trial of the soul? What could that possibly entail? What did it mean to face his deepest regret? Before he could voice his questions, Kale gave him a single nod. Follow me. They walked deeper into the forest, the path growing narrower and more difficult with each step. The trees seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing darker. Elian could feel the weight of the air around him, thick with tension. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the forest became. Eventually, they reached a clearing, but this one was unlike any Elian had seen before. The ground was covered in a thick layer of fog, the air damp and cold. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone circle, its surface smooth and worn by time. It was ancient, just like the sword Elian carried. This is where the trial will begin, Kale said, his voice low and solemn. Step into the circle. Elian hesitated but obeyed, stepping carefully into the center of the stone ring. As soon as his foot touched the stone, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The fog swirled around his legs, and the world around him seemed to fade away. He blinked, and when he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the forest. Instead, he was standing in the middle of a battlefield. The sky above was dark and heavy with smoke, the air thick with the stench of burning wood and flesh. All around him, the sounds of battle raged. Elian's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around, his pulse quickening. It was as if he had stepped into a nightmare, one he couldn't escape. "Where am I?" he whispered, but the words were lost in the chaos around him. He turned in a circle, trying to make sense of the scene. His eyes landed on a group of soldiers charging toward a fortified wall, their weapons raised. The scene was violent, chaotic, everything he had studied in history books, yet nothing like he had ever imagined. As he watched, a figure appeared in front of him. It was him. Or rather, it was someone who looked exactly like him, dressed in the armor of a warrior. The figure's eyes were cold, filled with determination, but there was a sadness there, too. Elian's heart clenched as he recognized the face of the warrior. It was a version of himself, one that had been shaped by war, by the loss of everything he loved. A version of him that had chosen to fight, to kill, to survive at any cost. "Who are you?" Elian asked, his voice trembling. The warrior did not respond, but instead raised his sword, pointing it toward the battlefield. The image around Elian shifted, and he saw himself standing on the front lines of a great war, leading a charge against an enemy he couldn't recognize. The battle raged around him, but he was focused only on the fight in front of him. Elian watched in horror as his other self cleaved through enemy soldiers, his movements sharp and precise. And then he saw it, a woman standing in the distance watching him. Her face was familiar, and yet Elian couldn't place her. She was standing by the edge of the battlefield, holding a small child in her arms. The child was crying, but the woman's eyes were fixed on him, filled with a sorrow that seemed to pierce his heart. "Elian," the woman's voice echoed in his mind. "Is this who you want to become?" Elian's breath caught in his throat. The woman was someone he had known in his past, someone he had loved. But she was gone now, lost in the chaos of a war he had fought to protect. And as he watched the battlefield, he realized the cost of that war. The cost of his choices. The warrior before him, his other self, continued to fight, oblivious to the woman's gaze. Elian's heart twisted with regret. He had chosen this path once, hadn't he? He had chosen to fight, to protect at all costs. But now, standing here, he saw the truth. He had lost everything in his pursuit of power, of revenge. "Elian," the woman's voice called again, more urgently now. "Do you understand?" Tears welled in Elian's eyes as he turned away from the battlefield, his heart heavy with the weight of his past. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I chose this. I chose war." The world around him seemed to collapse, the fog swirling as the scene faded into darkness. Elian collapsed to his knees, the weight of his regret crashing over him. And then in the stillness, Kale's voice reached him. "This is the trial, Elian. To face the choices you've made and to decide how you will move forward." Elian stood, his chest tight with emotion. He had seen the cost of his choices, the people he had lost, the mistakes he had made. But now he had a choice. He could continue down the path of war, or he could choose a different path, a path of peace, of healing, and of restoration. As the fog cleared, Elian knew what he had to do. He had faced his deepest regret, and he had chosen to move forward, to restore the empire not through power and violence, but through unity and strength of heart. He turned to Kale, who had watched him in silence. "I'm ready," Elian said, his voice firm and steady. "I will restore the empire, but I will do it my way, not through war, but through peace." Kale nodded, his eyes filled with approval. "Then you are ready, Elian. The sword will follow your lead, but remember, this is just the beginning. The true challenge lies ahead." And with that, Elian's journey to restore the Golden Empire had begun, not as a warrior of destruction, but as a leader of hope.